Yeah, obviously I have a lot to say about what you wrote. So just to extend this a little bit, this last remark, once we acknowledge that the way we think and act is completely influenced by history, we'll be a lot better off. As I said, thinkers like Margolis and McLuhan would certainly agree with you, perhaps for different reasons, slightly different reasons. Certainly, when we look at McLuhan, we see that part of what he does think that he's a kind of a prophet. I believe that he's trying to point to the contemporary reality that everyone else is missing, which I guess is what a prophet does, right? And a prophet doesn't really tell about the future so much as tell about the present, and try to point out to everybody, what you're blind to, and certainly what McLuhan thought that most of us, especially the sort of intelligentsia, the college professors, the journalists, the politicians, the people in charge, is that what they're blind to was that they lived in a new world. And that new world was being shaped by electronic media. It seems like a thing that perhaps we're more willing to acknowledge 50 years later. There's not that kind of resistance. I mean, there are people who just don't know what's going on, right? I mean like there are important people in the world who have no clue because they're not thoughtful people. But I think thoughtful people in our age are more willing to to acknowledge that something like, let's say, cell phones and the internet and digital technology in general has not only changed the world, it's changing people. And that was a harder thing perhaps to get across in the early 60s or somebody like McLuhan. Maybe, the transition from print as a dominant form of media to basically television, it was happening under his nose, but it was harder for people to sort of conceptualize the significance of it. I think we're perhaps more open to the thesis. Again, this is I thought it was interesting. This is again sort of a comment on, I suppose, Margolis and really kind of Hegel too, right? The idea of the owl of Minerva. We can know our thinking is limited, but are unable to know how limited it is, and that's certainly true. If one takes the historicist thesis. And so it also makes problematic the kind of thing we see, we look at McLuhan, McLuhan trying to conceptualize, trying to understand, trying to point out the ways in which our thinking is changing because of electronic media. I mean, how do you really do that, I mean, mustn't it, if it's a similar thought here, we can't know how limited our limited thinking is, but, we can't see from any kind of privileged perspective just how we're being changed by the forms of media that we use. Well, I would say that when you read McLuhan, it's great stuff, and it's unfairly maligned by snooty college teachers like me, and because it seems like it's outmoded, or he was too much of an attention hound in his time, and that's all really unfair. I mean, it's a very interesting thesis, and we owe a lot to McLuhan. But I would suggest that when you read him, you keep in mind that what he's doing is, if we're really talking about something as deep as pointing out how forms of thinking and perception in human beings are changing as a result of electronic media, if he could shed some light on that, that would be a big accomplishment. I mean, as opposed to give us a total theory of describing just what we are now and how it's different from that seems to me to be kind of impossible. But if he can, make some suggestions that are helpful or that shed some light on things, that would be great. This is very Hegelian, this person who wrote this. We must realize that each stage of ideas will pose their own level of contradictions. As I understand it, that's the Hegelian view of history, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, the idea that contradictions work themselves out in human history, and that we move on by resolving those contradictions, move into the next oppositions or contradictions and resolve them, sublimate them. Considering what philosophy actually stands for, it indubitably always comes too late, right? it isn't until we move to a higher stage that we can realize the limits of the previous perspective. Again, get very Hegelian. But, I mean, I say that McLuhan, especially, there's no grand Hegelian notion that we're moving towards some kind of state of absolute knowledge or true enlightenment, or truly rational society. I think that McLuhan is just pointing out we're changing. I mean, who knows where we're going? And, one of the great questions of digital technology is whether it's bringing us to a better or worse place, politically, socially, artistically, culturally, and in terms of who we are, or whether it's not. I mean, that question, I think, is something that we should be continually debating. Is that it? That is it. Okay. Well, thanks for listening. Very interesting discussion. I look forward to week 2. And again, I mean, it's a class, right? I mean, so I should be responding to what you say as much as I can. I think this is easier for me than jumping into the discussion board during the week. So, okay. Hopefully talk to you next week. Just the awkward moment trying to find the off button.